Welcome to the lecture 15 for innovation and commercialization. In this couple of sets of lectures, we'll be covering the American innovation ecosystem. In the previous lecture set, we had covered how now that we understood the individual innovation process and what that actually means for how individuals and people innovate. And then we brought that up to the organizational level, which starts with teams, and then we moved to talk about universities and corporations and a little bit about the nation state, the country. So obviously now that we have this methodology, we can build up and use what we know now as a lens to look backwards on the American innovation system, in particular the more recent past. This is important because looking forward, people interested in innovation, whether it's innovators, investors, governments, whomever, what you need to do is to understand what's happening in the macro system in order to make sure that, as you know, in this particular class, we're concerned about longer-term fundamental innovation that brings decades of growth. And so if there are natural tendencies, based on innovation paradigms, which we'll talk about after this lecture, there's big waves that occur, and it affects how the system changes. And really, there's nothing you can do about those naturally occurring innovation paradigms. However, recognizing that they exist and not using the same old formula that you did in the past, looking at the entire system and understanding how to encourage innovation, again, at that bottom level up through organizations, and see where we are in this macroscopic system, and understand possibly, again, at the bottom level what we have to do now in order to innovate upwards. It's important to know this from a governmental point of view, although notice what I just said, which is that ultimately the information about innovation and how it fits into the current macro system is needed at the individual level, because those individuals are the ones trying to innovate. They hopefully can see the change in the ecosystem, look for opportunity because of the way it's changed, create organizations that will now, in this new environment, allow that innovation process to run, thereby changing the macro system. So that's kind of the as we build up, that's the philosophy. It's not really to do a top-down process, as we've shown in this lecture series. To create a vibrant innovation ecosystem, we constantly need innovators and innovative teams and people that understand innovation working from the bottom up in order to create a lasting innovation ecosystem with high growth. Welcome to lecture 15, which is the American innovation ecosystem. Now, we've been working our way up, just to review. So we've spent most of the class, most of this lecture series, on building up from the human innovation process. We've passed now through teams and organizations. Now you could see that when we started thinking about organizations, and we started thinking about at the very end of last lecture, the nation state, you start to see that there's some long-term changes in the innovation system, and we want to understand that. And we want to understand that so that regardless of particular times that we're living in, we can take our lessons about our human process of innovating and understand how to apply it in its best possible way to create the greatest innovation, productivity, and outcome. In this lecture, we're going to start with the early foundations in the American innovation system, just to talk about why there are some differences with the U.S. and other places. On the other hand, we want to lead up in post-World War II and beyond, is that these natural foundations were built upon by some factors that really accelerated things. And to assume that the American innovation system will always put out, at this great level, is a bad assumption. I believe it can, and it will naturally recover as long as we don't do anything that destroys the foundation. And this is all because I believe that we are in a natural innovation paradigm, which is what the next lecture is about. But so let's start with these early foundations for the U.S. ecosystem, the American innovation ecosystem. And then we'll talk about the early post-World War II years, which is what we consider to be the sort of evolution of the more modern American ecosystem. So let's talk about early foundations then. The early ecosystem was simply that, if you look at the United States and the world, you've got a sort of like known world. And amazingly enough, fairly late in mankind's progression, all of a sudden you discover that there's a new world. And the thing you have to remember is that, this new world, started. There were certainly people here, obviously. We refer to them as American Indians, which are actually a lot of people believe came across the Aleutian Islands from Asia. But the bottom line is mostly from a population density point of view compared to Europe, it was relatively uninhabited, and that when the known world comes in, you're actually coming at a fairly late stage. And in this process, you are creating a situation. All of the understandings of really economics combined with only at the very earliest stage, meaning like Adam Smith, and combined with Industrial Revolution, which was about to happen. All were very important things for how the U.S. developed. It didn't have 5,000 years of history like China, and it didn't have thousands of years of European history, modern age, and so it was pretty much a clean slate, and there had been a lot learned by mankind, and the U.S. was going to take advantage of that. Now, when I go back this far, a lot of you are probably saying, well, gee, yeah, this is all very interesting, but America's innovating, and it will always innovate and all that. And like I said, I want to create the foundation for this, and before I go on, I want to read you something from Inside Real Innovation. I want to read just to justify, going along further here and looking at kind of the early America. If you read the beginning of chapter 6 in Inside Real Innovation, there's a quote from Socrates, which is 399 BC. So if you think that we keep on evolving into history that doesn't repeat itself, you'd be wrong, because the quote in there is about, it's basically Socrates told by Plato in the Apology, which is recorded document about the history of what was going on there. And basically, a lot like America, in its time, the were really advanced, right? New forms of government, experimenting with democracy, Plato, Socrates. I mean, you're talking about incredible foresight into the future, and yet, um, there are similar things going on as our innovation paradigm slows down that you saw back then. For example, at the end of a paradigm, you typically see people doing all sorts of activities that weren't involved in the early part of creating that great system. And it's because it's so successful that the economy basically provides a lot of resources for people that weren't involved in the activities that helped create it, take advantage of those resources and do other things. Now, of course, those resources are the very thing that allows you to have government, the domestication of plants and animals and all this sort of thing, obviously led to the ability to feed people more efficiently, which allowed them to do things like worry about governments and intellect and everything. However, there's a negative side, which is that, yes, you become so efficient and productive, but it also means that you support more and more citizens with capital that was earned in a different way. And so that quote at the beginning of chapter 6 is, "Good sir, you are an Athenian, a citizen of the greatest city with the greatest reputation for both wisdom and power. Are you not ashamed of your eagerness to possess as much wealth, reputation, and honors as possible, while you do not care for nor give thought to wisdom or truth, or the best possible state of your soul?" So if you look at the arguments after the 2007-2008 financial problem in the United States, I think you could argue that Socrates would be viewing the argument between the financial service sector and the government in the same light, in the sense that they're both taxes and the output of what got us here, yet they're arguing with each other about how much they deserve to take and why the other one messed it up. So again, it's worthy to go back and say, does America have a particular foundation that's different? But what kind of dangers are we encountering as we look at what's happening in recent times? So, and since we know about the innovation process and how we've built it up now, we can have a great lens on what are our chances of achieving fundamental innovation productivity again. And so it's this lens that we're using, by the way. We're not looking at it in any other way. We're looking at it from an innovation way. And so one of the basic premises here, I think, about innovation is our ability to do market implementation and technology iteration. And can we accomplish that? And of course, what I'm trying to set up here is that if you look at this kind of clean slate, there's a few things that got inserted because of the knowledge of government organizations and the fact that Industrial Revolution. So, for example, concept of growth. So the concept of growth was also just arising because there are estimates that in previous times you had about, before the Industrial Revolution, you had about 0.25% annualized growth. So whatever it is, I mean, even if it's that exact number or not, with the industrial age happening, essentially widgets and machines, right, were clearly creating growth that was visible to people. That the idea that things would stay static and the same forever was changing. So even though innovation, as we're talking about here, is a quite an advanced concept, think about it. People were starting to see, hey, um, you could build things that are labor-saving devices, and it permanently changes the way we've been doing things. And quite excited about the fact that maybe the world doesn't have 0.25% growth. I mean, they really didn't know that at the time, but you start to see in your lifetime, you can make massive change by tinkering. The other key aspect was that there was no top-down state controlling anything. One of the issues that the old world had was old structures, and sort of evolving over time is way more complex than having a fresh state. And in the new world, with the fact that there wasn't any IT yet, information technology, Europe and England was very, very far away. And so what this really induced was a great amount of individual freedom. So let's clear up our slate here a little bit. So we have the concept of growth. We have no top-down state control. And this induces a great amount of individual liberty. In fact, it's liberty that people started to go to America to get, and still to this day do that, right? So we tend to attract people that want to have that freedom. And so let's think about our process. So if you think about open up these circles, that is, you have to consider things. Let's consider market. Let's suppose I'm a top-down historical area where there's particular families or people that control certain industrialized segments. It could be, the reality, very difficult to break in. But now if I go into a new country and there's none of those structures, then I could believe that I could go into any of these applications and do a lot of different things. In fact, if I don't like what's coming from the outside, maybe I can even start playing games on how to make things more favorable now that I have really a border around a new country. And again, technology, we got industrial revolution that's about to happen, plus this concept of growth. And so all of them start to say, focusing on machines and how things can be made, and then I have to make them locally so I need factories. So all sorts of technology and tinkering going on, and they're thinking about particular applications that they have access to, and they're not limited by previous structures and relationships. And business models are even open because, the way that things were done before do not have to happen that way here. So relationships between banking and, local environments that can gather money together in order to do something, all this stuff is possible, where, again, in old structures, not so. So you have a great foundation for innovation because of this strange historical event. And you can see, we're covering a lot of history very fast here, but you know, this created a population of tinkering, by the way, is the best way to describe it. And you know, historical Tocqueville and others who visited, they talked about American tinkering and about how another interesting thing is they're constantly forming associations. Which means essentially, from an innovation perspective, that you're creating, more localized associations to understand how things are needed, how things are interactive. If you're in an older economy that's very historic and growth, people are starting to be in growth, but they seem still more people see that things are static, then it's old associations that are kind of filling up space, and you're not constantly forming and removing associations for the purposes of getting knowledge of market implementation and technology, which is really the purpose of an association of the type we're talking about here. So there's an additional part of US, which is Westward Expansion. It only enhances all of these things, because right when you think that you're going to produce New England, it's going to look exactly like everything else. First of all, probably individual liberty is going to be different because the people there aren't going to put the same kinds of structure in place. And even if they wanted to, the Westward Expansion continues to add the, people can squish out of the system. So if you push down in New England, they pop out and go west. And so in other words, there's sort of a conservancy of individual mobility and liberty. And so this keeps the ability to innovate going. So this kind of created, Americans immersed in market and implementation, farms, machine shops, do-it-yourself. It became kind of a product of all this, and also a necessity. Western Expansion, you're not going to have all that support. You're going to have to build it as you go out, and there's limited people. So in a way, these people are forced to become T-shaped of the time, where they have to drill down deep enough or find somebody that can help them understand certain things. If I want to build a factory and I didn't do it before, how do I find the person that can help me? And then all the other people around them learn, and this is kind of massive growth that happens over a long period of time. And in fact, let's look at some historical examples.